I used to believe my marriage was unshakable. Michael Carter, my husband of 10 years, was the kind of man people admired. Smart, calm, handsome in a quiet, reliable way. He worked in downtown San Francisco at a rising tech company, managing large-scale projects that sounded far too complicated for me to fully understand. And yet, every night, he came home to our house in Palo Alto. To me, to Chloe and Alex, to grilled cheese sandwiches, tiny sucker cleats in the hallway, and bedtime stories about dragons and space unicorns. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. That was the word I always used when I talked about us. Solid. Michael kissed me goodbye each morning. He texted during lunch sometimes. On Sundays, he helped Chloe with her science projects while Alex ran wild in the backyard. We had rituals. We had a life. People looked at us and saw stability. And maybe that was the problem. Because while everything looked stable from the outside, something inside me had started to shift. Or maybe it wasn't me at all. Maybe it was him. It started with silence. Not loud silence, not the kind filled with slammed doors or cold shoulders. No, it was quieter than that. Softer. The kind of silence that sits between two people who know each other too well. Michael stopped telling me the little things. He still smiled, still said, "I'm fine," still held my hand when we crossed the street, but I could feel it. The presence of something missing. Or worse, something being hidden. He mentioned her once. Her name was Sophie. She was new, transferred from the New York office. "Smart," he said over dinner, stabbing at a salad. "Takes initiative. I think she'll be good for the Vega project." I smiled and nodded and went back to feeding Alex's carrots. It meant nothing at the time. A name, a face I hadn't seen, another one of his work people. But over the next few weeks, I heard the name again and again. Not often, just enough. One night, as I folded his dress shirts, I noticed a scent that didn't belong. Faint, clean, feminine. It wasn't my perfume. It wasn't mine at all. I stood there for a moment, pressing the fabric to my nose, trying to tell myself it could be anything. Maybe a hug from someone in the office, a crowded elevator, an over-perfumed client. But something in my chest clenched anyway. Then came the drawing. Chloe was sitting at the kitchen table, proudly showing me her crayon masterpiece. Our family, me, Daddy, Alex, and her. But there was a fifth figure, a woman in heels, standing close to Michael. "Who's this?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "That's Daddy's work friend. She's pretty. She was laughing with him in the parking lot when we picked him up last time." That night, I didn't say anything. I didn't confront him. I watched him eat dinner. I watched him talk to the kids. I watched the way he looked through me. And then I started watching him in other ways. I drove past his office once. Just once. Telling myself it was coincidence. But I parked across the street and waited. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I saw them come out together. Michael and a woman I had never seen before, but knew instantly had to be Sophie. She was tall, poised, dressed in navy. They weren't touching, but they were close. Too close. Her face lit up when he said something. He leaned toward her in a way that felt intimate, familiar, comfortable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove home and made dinner and kissed my children goodnight. And when Michael got home, I didn't ask, because I already knew. A week later, Michael told me he had to travel for work. It wasn't unusual. He traveled maybe once or twice a year for conferences or client meetings. This time, it was a 3-day convention in Las Vegas. I asked who else was going, and he answered without pause, like he'd rehearsed it. "Sophie's going too, and a few others from the team." He didn't look up from his suitcase as he said it. My throat felt dry, but I nodded. "Sounds busy." He smiled. "It'll be boring, trust me." He kissed me goodbye early that morning, before the sun came up. I watched him back out of the driveway with his travel mug and perfect timing, like a man who had nothing to hide. But I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest, like I'd just handed him over to someone else. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, replaying his voice in my head. I kept reaching for my phone, checking for texts that didn't come. When he finally messaged me, it was short. Long day, panels were good, gonna crash. Love you. He didn't call. Michael always called when he traveled. Something about that silence made everything louder. I opened Instagram, typed in the name of the hotel he said he was staying at, the Lux area. I browsed through their tagged photos mindlessly, not expecting anything, until I found it. It was a video, just a few seconds long, someone filming the rooftop bar at sunset, panning across cocktails and skyline. But there, in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was Michael, sitting at a table, across from a woman with dark hair tied back, wearing a navy blazer. They were laughing, leaning toward each other like they were the only two people in the world. I stared at the screen until the video looped again and again. Then I locked my phone and sat there in the dark, completely still. I wasn't shocked, not really. It just confirmed what I'd already known deep down but hadn't wanted to face. The next morning, I got up early, packed lunches, dressed the kids, and smiled through it all. I helped Chloe tie her shoes, I told Alex he was brave, I answered emails, I folded towels. I did everything a good wife does. And when Michael texted, "Heading to the airport, can't wait to see you," I wrote back a heart emoji, and nothing more. When he came home that night, he smelled like hotel soap and aftershave. He hugged the kids, asked about school, told me the conference was a blur of panels and networking. I asked him if he had fun. He said, not really, it was exhausting. He didn't mention Sophie. Not once. That night, we got into bed, and he reached for me like everything was normal. His hand brushed my waist, and I felt nothing. I closed my eyes, turned away from him, and whispered, "I'm tired." And I was. Tired of pretending, tired of waiting for the truth to surface, tired of being in a marriage where I had to find pieces of my husband and photos taken by strangers online. I didn't need proof anymore. I didn't need a confrontation. Because whatever happened in Vegas didn't stay there. It came home with him, and it was lying right beside me. In the days after he returned, I became someone else. Or maybe I just stopped pretending to be the version of myself that smiled through everything. I went through the motions. I packed lunches, graded spelling tests, smiled at other moms at school pickup. But something inside me had shifted. I had stopped waiting for him to explain himself. I knew he wouldn't. I knew that whatever happened in Vegas was real, and it had changed him. The way he looked at me was different now. Softer, but more distant, like he was covering something instead of sharing it. He didn't lie outright, not with words, but he lied with silence, with omission, with the way he never once brought up Sophie, not even to say she did a good job on the project. She had disappeared from his vocabulary entirely, which only confirmed she hadn't disappeared from his thoughts. I started watching everything more closely. His phone never left his pocket. He used to charge it by the bed. Now it stayed face down on the kitchen counter or in his jacket. He didn't change his routines drastically because Michael wasn't careless, but I knew him too well. I saw the changes. In the way he lingered in the car before coming inside, in the way he stood a little too long in the shower, in the way he smiled at me like I was someone fragile, someone he didn't want to break too quickly. I wasn't fragile. I was furious, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I started preparing myself. I created a private email account. I changed the password on my cloud storage. I made copies of our financial records, bank accounts, retirement funds, his stock options. I wasn't planning to use any of it. Not yet. But it gave me a strange sense of calm to know that if things fell apart, I wouldn't be caught off guard. I also made an appointment with a therapist. Not for marriage counseling, for myself. I needed someone to say it out loud to. I needed someone to hear me and not look away. The therapist asked me what I wanted. I didn't know how to answer her. Did I want to save my marriage? Did I want the truth? Did I want revenge? I said, I just want to feel like I'm not crazy. Because that's what this kind of betrayal does. It makes you doubt your instincts, your memory, your sanity. You start to question if the problem is you. if you're too sensitive, too needy, not enough. But I knew now that wasn't true. I wasn't imagining things. He had changed. And whatever happened between him and Sophie, it wasn't over. Not yet. So I waited. I played the role. I cooked dinner, I laughed at the right times. I made love to a man who didn't know I was already gone inside. Because I needed time. Time to gather proof. Time to see how far he would go. And when the moment was right, I would stop being quiet. I would stop being patient. I would stop being the wife who waited.
It happened on a Wednesday. The kids had gone to bed early, and Michael was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his laptop on his knees, pretending to work. I stood in the doorway for a moment just watching him. He looked so calm, so focused, as if nothing had changed. As if I didn't wake up every morning with a knot in my chest and fall asleep every night beside a stranger. I told him I was going to bed and kissed him on the forehead. He smiled, said, "I'll be up in a bit," and turned back to his screen. I didn't go to sleep. I waited. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Around midnight, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. He brushed his teeth, opened the closet, climbed into bed, and exhaled like a man relieved to finally rest. I waited until I heard his breathing deepen and slow. Then I slipped out of bed, tiptoed into the living room, and picked up the one thing he thought I'd never touch, his work iPad. It was usually locked, but that night, for whatever reason, it wasn't. Maybe he'd grown careless. Maybe he trusted me too much, or maybe he no longer cared. At first, there was nothing. Work emails, Slack messages, project documents. Boring, gray, sterile. Then I opened the photo gallery. He didn't keep much. Just a few screenshots of slides, a team dinner, some selfies with Chloe. But I kept scrolling. And near the bottom, there it was. A photo. Taken in a hotel room. He was sitting on the edge of a neatly made bed, shirt unbuttoned, glass of whiskey in hand. He wasn't alone. Sophie stood beside him in the mirror's reflection, smiling at him like she knew she belonged there. Her heels were off, her blouse slightly untucked. His hand was resting on her hip. It wasn't graphic. It didn't need to be. The intimacy in that one image said everything. I stared at it for a long time. My hands weren't shaking. I didn't cry. I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like I had left my own body. Like I was standing in the corner of the room, watching someone else's life fall apart. I took a screenshot and emailed it to my private account. Then I placed the iPad exactly where I found it. When I returned to the bedroom, Michael was still asleep, his mouth slightly open, completely unaware that the truth was no longer hidden. I lay beside him, facing the opposite direction, my eyes wide open in the dark. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't a hunch or a fear or an intuition. It was real. He had betrayed me, and I finally had proof. The next morning felt like any other. Chloe spilled cereal on the floor. Alex couldn't find his shoes. Michael was rushing out the door with his travel mug and half a piece of toast in his mouth. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "Love you," like he always did. And like I always did, I said, "You too." But I didn't mean it. All day, I waited. I played my role like a woman rehearsing the same scene she'd lived for years, but something had changed. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I was calm, steady, cold even. That evening, after dinner, after the kids had gone to bed, I poured us each a glass of wine and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were on his phone. I waited until he looked up. "I need to ask you something," I said. He set the phone down slowly. "Okay?" I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't accuse. I just slid my phone across the table. On the screen was the photo from his iPad. I watched his face. I wanted to see it, the exact second the lie died. The flicker in his eyes, the tiny collapse of the muscles in his jaw, the shift from denial to panic. But he didn't say a word. He just stared at it. "You want to explain?" I asked. Still, he was silent. His hands stayed flat on the table. His breathing changed. He looked like a man caught in the middle of two burning houses, not knowing which one to save. I saw the messages too. That was a lie. I hadn't read any messages. I didn't need to. The photo was enough, but I wanted to watch him squirm. He finally looked at me. Emily. My name in his mouth sounded small, empty. How long has it been going on? He hesitated, and that hesitation was all I needed. I stood up, picked up my glass, took a long, slow sip. You could have told me. You could have looked me in the eye like a man and ended it before it became this. But instead, you let me sleep beside you. You let me carry your children. You let me love you while you were giving parts of yourself to someone else. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I don't want your apology. I don't need your excuses. What I needed was respect. What I deserved was honesty. But that version of you doesn't exist anymore. He looked devastated, not broken, just caught. And that's when I knew he didn't regret what he did. He only regretted being found out. I turned my back and walked away, leaving him sitting there at the table, holding a glass of wine he would never drink. That night, I slept in the guest room. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. And when I woke up, I knew something for certain. I was done waiting for him to become the man I married, because that man was already gone.
I didn't leave him. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even the next week. People think betrayal breaks you all at once, like a shattered window or a car crash. But the truth is, it unravels you slowly, like a thread coming loose from your favorite sweater. You wake up one day and realize you're no longer the woman who used to wait at the door for his key in the lock. You've changed. And so has he. But the kids. Chloe still needed bedtime stories. Alex still wanted pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I didn't want their world to collapse just because mine had. So I stayed. Not for Michael, not out of fear, but because I needed time to figure out what healing would look like, to understand what kind of woman I was becoming now that the lie was out in the open. Michael, to his credit, didn't beg. He didn't offer some dramatic apology or sob into his hands like a guilty movie husband. He kept his distance. He cooked breakfast the next morning, folded laundry without being asked, showed up for soccer practice and school pickup, and every mundane moment in between, as if trying to prove something through routine. But routine wasn't enough. One night, I found him sitting on the edge of our bed holding a framed photo of us from our 5th anniversary. His eyes were red. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet. I don't know why I did it. It wasn't about her. I didn't answer. Because maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe it was about him needing to feel new again, seen again, desired. Or maybe it was about the parts of me he stopped trying to reach. But none of that mattered now. That night I told him I wanted space. Emotional space. Physical space. I asked him to sleep in the guest room. I wasn't punishing him. I just needed oxygen. He agreed. And over the next few days, I started living a life that was both familiar and foreign. I went to work. I packed school lunches. I met my therapist every Thursday and told her the truth, every detail. She listened, without flinching. I started journaling again. I lit candles. I sat in silence. I cried in the car and laughed with the kids, and for the first time in a long time, I started hearing my own voice again, beneath the noise, beneath the fear. I wasn't ready to leave yet, but I was done clinging. Whatever came next would be on my terms, because I wasn't just the wife who had been betrayed, I was the woman who had survived it. It was a Friday afternoon when I saw her. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't stalking. I wasn't hunting for confrontation. I had taken Alex to his pediatric checkup and stopped by the coffee shop near Michael's office, one of those chain places with fake wood walls and indie music humming under the hiss of espresso machines. I stood in line, scrolling my phone, when I heard her laugh. It was faint,
but unmistakable. A high, polished laugh, the kind that floats just above the chatter of the room and settles into your spine like a memory. I turned my head. She was standing near the back wall, holding a drink, talking to another woman I didn't recognize. And then she looked up, right at me. Our eyes met. I froze. She didn't. She didn't flinch, didn't turn away, didn't smile or pretend not to know who I was. She just held my gaze for a second too long, like she was measuring me. Like she already knew exactly how much damage she'd caused and didn't feel the need to apologize for any of it. She looked younger than I expected. Not prettier, just newer. Shiny in that way women look before life has had time to press its weight into their skin. I wanted to look away first. I wanted to pretend I was better than this moment. But I didn't. I stood there. I met her stare, and I didn't blink. Eventually, her friend said something. Sophie turned, laughed again, and walked out without another glance. She didn't need to say anything. She had already taken what she wanted. Back at home, I didn't tell Michael. There was no point. If he didn't already feel the weight of what he'd done, no conversation would make it heavier. That night, while folding laundry, I found one of his shirts at the bottom of the basket. I picked it up, held it to my face, and breathed in. No perfume, no trace of her. Just fabric. Clean. Empty. I didn't cry. I simply folded it, placed it back in the drawer, and kept going. Something in me had changed. Seeing her didn't make me jealous. It didn't make me sad. It made me certain. Certain that I could never unsee the truth, never unknow what I knew, never fall asleep in his arms without remembering hers had been there first. Whatever came next, I wouldn't hide from it. I had already faced the worst. Now it was time to rebuild what was left on my own terms. I didn't make a dramatic decision. There was no slamming of doors, no suitcases dragged across the hardwood floor. I didn't scream at him. I didn't key his car or throw his clothes out the window. That wasn't me. That was never going to be me. What I did was quieter. I opened a new checking account in my name only. I transferred a small amount every few days, just enough to not be noticed. I researched apartments in neighborhoods where the schools were still good and the streets were still safe. I started bringing my lunch to work, stopped browsing online shops, paused the Amazon deliveries. I didn't want revenge. I wanted options. And every quiet step I took gave me back a piece of myself. Michael started noticing something too. At first, he thought I was just distant, tired, going through something personal. But then came the questions. The late night, half-hearted, "Are you okay?" And "Is there something you're not telling me?" The irony. One night, I caught him looking at me with the same searching eyes I used to give him. He was trying to read me, trying to figure out if I was still his. He didn't know that I wasn't. Not really. He tried harder after that, making dinner without being asked, picking up flowers, rubbing my shoulders in the kitchen while I washed dishes, like muscle memory had suddenly turned emotional again. It didn't work. Because it was too late. When you bury a woman in silence and betrayal, don't be surprised when she comes back someone you no longer recognize. One night, after we put the kids to bed, he came into the bedroom and sat down across from me on the edge of the bed. His voice was tired, but sincere in a way that felt almost childish. "He ended it with her," he said. No build-up, just that. I didn't look up from the book I was reading. "You should have ended it before it began," I replied. He stayed there, staring at the floor like it might give him better answers than I ever could. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice." He looked at me then. Really looked. And I could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear.
Not fear of losing me. Fear of knowing that he already had. I want to fix this. You can't fix what you broke with someone else's hands. He didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. I set my book down and looked him in the eye. I'm not leaving tonight. Maybe not even tomorrow. But I am leaving. I need you to prepare the kids for that. Not with blame, not with bitterness, just truth. I won't lie to them. He swallowed hard, nodded once, quietly. Slowly, like he finally understood that this wasn't a phase. This was the end of something. And maybe the beginning of something.
I left on a Thursday morning. Not because it meant anything special, not because I wanted to make a point. It was simply the day everything lined up. The apartment keys in my pocket, the lease signed, the kids at school, the sun rising behind a thin curtain of fog. I didn't tell Michael ahead of time. He knew it was coming, he just didn't know when. He had stopped asking questions the week before, when he realized I wasn't bluffing, when he realized my silence wasn't a tactic, but a truth he no longer had the right to challenge. I packed light. Some clothes, my laptop, journals, the kids' drawings I couldn't leave behind, a single photo of us, back when things were still good, not because I missed those days, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to believe something was unbreakable. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table when I came down with the suitcase. He didn't speak right away, just watched me, like he still hoped I might change my mind. I found a place, I said softly. It's small, but nice, close to the school. He nodded. His eyes were red but dry. You taking the car? I'll get a rental for now. You need it for the kids. He looked away then, jaw tightening. I reached for the handle of the suitcase, but paused. They need stability, I added. We'll make a schedule. I don't want to disrupt their lives more than we have to. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. What do I tell them? I looked at him and said, the truth. That love isn't always enough to fix what's broken, but it doesn't mean we love them any less. He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, I could tell he understood. Not just the words, the finality. I walked out the door without a hug, without a goodbye kiss, without turning back. I didn't need a grand exit, just air, just distance, just space to become whole again. The new apartment smelled like fresh paint and unfamiliar carpet. The windows were bare, the walls blank, but it was mine. And as I stood in the center of that tiny living room, suitcase at my feet, silence all around me, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. The first night alone was quiet, in a way I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps in the hallway, no dishwasher humming in the background, no Michael brushing his teeth in the bathroom down the hall. Just me, a cup of tea going cold on the counter, and the sound of a city I hadn't listened to in far too long. I didn't cry. I expected to. I had packed tissues, candles, even a playlist labeled breakdown songs, assuming I'd need the soundtrack for devastation, but it never came. Instead, I wandered the apartment in my socks, touched the bare walls, opened every cabinet, and sat on the floor of the bedroom for no reason other than to feel what silence actually sounded like. It was strange, and beautiful, and terrifying. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had to, but because my body hadn't caught up to the new reality. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sky turn from bruised gray to soft blue. I went for a walk. No destination, no deadline, just my shoes on pavement and the breath in my lungs. I stopped at a bookstore, bought a paperback I didn't need, ate lunch at a quiet corner cafe where no one knew my name. I didn't check my phone. I didn't text Michael. I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone. That afternoon, I hung the kids' drawings above my desk. Chloe's rainbow family,
Alex's misshapen dinosaur. I lit a candle, played an old playlist that had nothing to do with heartbreak, just music that made me feel like me. I slept better that night. Not long, but deeply. And in the days that followed, I learned how to live again. I called my sister, just to talk. I sent out resumes for freelance editing jobs. I bought groceries without checking a list written by someone else. I sang in the shower. I bought wine I actually liked. I sat on the balcony and let the wind touch my face like it was the first time. I missed the kids, of course. Every hour felt longer without their noise. But we had a rhythm. Weekends with me, school nights with him. They adjusted faster than I expected. Children are like that, more elastic than adults. They asked questions, but not hard ones. They just wanted to know that both homes had love in them. Michael texted sometimes, short messages, updates about the kids, photos from the soccer field, once a simple, "I hope you're okay." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I was okay. Not healed, not whole, but finally okay. The first time I saw Michael again in public was at Chloe's spring recital. She had begged us both to be there. "You have to come," she said, tugging at my sleeve the week before. "I have a solo, and Daddy promised." Of course he did. The auditorium was packed with parents clutching bouquets, their phones raised in anticipation. I arrived early, found a seat near the middle, and scanned the crowd out of instinct. He wasn't there yet. Part of me had rehearsed for this. What I'd say, how I'd look, how I'd smile politely and act like I hadn't once laid in bed beside him, wondering who he was texting while I slept. But when he did walk in, 5 minutes before the lights dimmed, none of that mattered. He looked almost exactly the same. Same coat, same careful posture, same tired eyes. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I wasn't bracing for the ache in my chest. I wasn't comparing myself to the woman he chose for a moment of weakness. I was simply there, present, rooted. He saw me and paused, gave a half smile. I nodded back, neither cold nor warm, just neutral, civil, human. He didn't sit beside me. There were too many people, too much unsaid. He took a seat a few rows behind, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. When Chloe walked on stage, I forgot it all. She was radiant. Nervous, yes, but bright. Her ponytail bouncing as she walked to the microphone, her tiny voice filling the space with a song about stars and dreams and not being afraid. And for a second, I felt the tears come. Not for Michael, not for the past, but for her. For this tiny human who had unknowingly carried the weight of our choices and still had the courage to sing anyway. When the recital ended, I waited in the crowd by the exit. Michael found us first. Chloe ran into his arms, beaming. "You were amazing," he whispered to her, lifting her off the ground. She turned to me. "Did you hear it, Mommy? I didn't mess up the high part." I said, "You were perfect." And she was. We stood there, the three of us, in a moment that used to be familiar, now foreign. A fractured family trying to fit inside a frame that no longer held us. Michael looked at me. There was a softness in his face. Regret, maybe? Or gratitude? Or both. He said, "Thanks for coming." I said, "I didn't come for you." He nodded once, like he already knew. And with that, I took Chloe's hand, kissed her forehead, and walked into the evening light. Whatever history stood behind us no longer owned me, because I had stopped being the woman defined by what he had done. I was the woman who stayed for her children and left for herself. 2 weeks after the recital, I got an email I almost deleted without reading. Subject line, "Long time, Em." It was from Claire Matthews, my old editor from the publishing house I used to freelance for before I had Alex. I hadn't heard from her in almost 4 years. I opened it cautiously, expecting something generic, maybe a LinkedIn update or newsletter, but it wasn't. "I saw your name mentioned in a piece last week. Chloe's art got featured in the local paper.
I remembered the way you used to write about her, even before she was born. I've been thinking about you. I don't know what your life looks like now, but I've got a new project, and I'd love for you to consider coming on as an editor. It's flexible, remote. Thought you might be ready to write again. I sat there, blinking at the screen, heart thudding harder than it should have. It wasn't a grand offer. It wasn't a life-changing salary or glamorous title, but it was a door, a crack of light, a version of me I hadn't touched in years, reaching out, asking if I was ready to come back. Was I? I stared at the email for almost an hour. Then I stood up, made a cup of coffee, and sat back down. And replied. Claire, I'd love to hear more. Tell me about the project. The moment I hit send, I felt it. That spark I hadn't felt in so long. Not hope, exactly. Hope is too fragile. No, this was strength. A reminder that even after everything, my voice still had value. The next few days moved differently. I walked with more purpose. I smiled at strangers. I found myself humming in the kitchen without noticing. The kids felt it too. Chloe asked me if something good happened. I said, maybe, and kissed the top of her head. At night, I started writing again. Not for work, not for deadlines, just for me. Pages filled with thoughts I'd buried for years. Not all of them were pretty, but they were honest, raw, real. Michael didn't know about the job offer, and I didn't feel the need to tell him. Because this part, this rebirth, belonged to me. It wasn't about moving on from him. It was about finally moving back toward myself. It started with a book. A week after I accepted Claire's offer, I stopped by a small independent bookstore downtown, one of those cozy, creaky floor places with handwritten recommendations tucked into every shelf. It smelled like paper and pine and possibility. I was reaching for a novel, an old favorite I hadn't read in years, when a hand reached for it at the same time. We both paused. He looked at me and smiled, apologetically. Sorry, please go ahead. I let out a soft laugh. No, it's okay. I've read it before. Twice, actually. He raised an eyebrow. Twice? That good, huh? Heartbreaking, but honest. He held the book in his hand, studying the cover like it might reveal something new. That's the best kind, isn't it? I nodded. The kind that doesn't pretend love is always enough. He glanced at me again. Yeah, life has a way of proving that. We didn't exchange names then. It was just a moment. A shared title, a shared truth. But a few days later, I saw him again. At the same bookstore. This time, he saw me first. You again, he said, holding up a new book. Should I get your review in advance? I smiled. Only if you want an honest one. We talked for 10 minutes, then 15. His name was Daniel. He was divorced. 2 kids. He worked in nonprofit development and wrote short stories in his spare time. There was something quiet about him. Like he didn't need to impress me. He just wanted to listen. And he did. I didn't give him my number. Not that day. But I thought about it later, lying in bed. Thought about how light I'd felt walking away. How I didn't feel like I owed him anything. And how that somehow made me want to see him again. He didn't remind me of Michael at all. And that was refreshing. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a fantasy. He was just kind. And after everything, kindness felt more intimate than anything else. The next week, I went back to the bookstore, not to chase him, just to be open. To let the universe know I wasn't closed off anymore. I was healing. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to be seen again.
Our first coffee wasn't a date. At least, that's what I told myself. Daniel texted me midweek, just a short message. That book you said would break me? You were right. Want to grab coffee and argue about it? I stared at the message longer than I should have. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. And then for once, I didn't overthink it. Sure, Saturday? We met at a quiet cafe, the kind with real mugs and old jazz records playing in the background. He was already there when I arrived, 2 cappuccinos on the table, one waiting for me. I sat across from him, cautious, but curious. We talked about the book at first, then about writing, then about parenthood and how it reshapes everything: your time, your body, your identity. And then for a moment, about silence. I spent 2 years not saying what I needed. By the time I did, it was too late. I looked at him. Did she leave? She was already gone, he said. I just hadn't noticed. We didn't go deeper than that. It wasn't time. But there was something honest in the way he said it. No blame, no bitterness. Just a man who had faced his own part in something and didn't pretend otherwise. That was rare. When we left, he didn't ask to walk me to my car. He just smiled and said, "Next time, you pick the book." I smiled back. "You're assuming there'll be a next time?" "I'm hoping." And that was it. He walked away, and for the rest of the day, I felt strangely steady. I wasn't in love. I wasn't even interested in being in love, but I was open. Later that night, I got a call. Michael. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me said I should. His voice was tense, tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. "We are talking." "Not like this, in person." I paused. "Is something wrong with the kids?" "No, they're fine. This is about us." There it was. I had been expecting it. I just didn't know it would come right after the first time I felt a little alive again. I told him we could meet Sunday. And when I hung up, I stood there in my kitchen, hands still on the counter, heart split in two, not because I was unsure of what I wanted, but because I finally realized I had options. And for a woman who had spent years feeling trapped, that alone was powerful. We met at the park, near the elementary school. It was quiet. Sunday morning. Just enough breeze to move the trees, not enough to chill the air. Families wandered the paths. A dad tossed a frisbee to his son. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. I saw Michael sitting on a bench, hands clasped, back hunched slightly like the weight of the conversation had already begun before I arrived. I took my time walking over. Not to make a point, I just didn't feel rushed. He looked up as I approached. "Thanks for coming," he said. I sat down beside him, but left space between us. Not symbolic, just honest. He looked thinner than before. Tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "I didn't want to do this over the phone. You deserved better than that." I nodded, but didn't respond. He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about you, about what I ruined." Still, I said nothing. I didn't owe him relief. Not anymore. "I don't know how I got so far away from the man you married. I kept telling myself it was just stress, work, the routine. But that's not the truth. The truth is I stopped choosing you. Every day, in the small ways, I chose convenience over connection, ego over honesty. And then I chose someone else." There it was, said plainly. Finally. "I hurt you," he said, voice low, "and I hate myself for that every day." I looked at him then, not with anger, but with clarity. "I know, and I believe you, but your guilt doesn't undo the damage." He swallowed hard. "I want to fix things," he said. "I know, but you can't." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just sat with it. Let the truth settle in. "I'm not saying this because I hate you. I don't. I'll always care about you. We built a life. We share children. We share memories. But we don't share a future anymore. Not the way we used to." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "And you deserve to be with someone who forgives you. Really forgives you. Starts fresh. I can't do that. I'm not that woman anymore." We sat in silence for a while. Then he nodded. "I didn't just lose my wife," he whispered. "I lost my friend." That part almost broke me, but I didn't let it. "I lost mine too," I said gently. "But I found someone else in the mirror, and she's worth protecting now." He looked away, then back. "Is there someone else?" I thought of Daniel, his quiet smile, the way he listened without trying to fix me, the way he never made me feel like I had to be anything other than what I was in the moment. "I'm getting to know someone," I said, "but mostly, I'm getting to know myself." Michael nodded, stood up slowly. He said, "You look strong." "I am." He walked away a few steps, then turned back. "Thank you for giving me this moment." I nodded once. "Goodbye, Michael." And I meant it. Not angrily, not bitterly, just fully. Clearly. Finally. I sat on that bench a while longer, watching the breeze stir the trees, watching people move past me, living their own quiet stories. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Like I had let go of something that was never meant to be carried this far.
We didn't call it a date. Daniel and I agreed to meet for dinner, somewhere quiet, nothing fancy, a little Italian place tucked between a florist and an old cinema. I wore a navy dress that made me feel confident without trying too hard. He wore a blazer over a plain white tee, like he hadn't decided if the night was formal or casual, and landed somewhere perfectly in between. When he saw me, he smiled, warm, easy, without expectation. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he replied, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Dinner was slow, unrushed. We talked about books, movies, the weird quirks of raising kids. He told me about a short story he was working on. I told him about the new editing job Claire had handed me, a memoir about grief and rebuilding, and how I'd cried twice before I even finished the introduction. He listened, really listened. And when I admitted that I was still figuring things out, that I wasn't sure what I wanted from anyone just yet, he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "You don't have to know. I'm just glad you're here." Something in my chest loosened. After dinner, we walked a few blocks through the quiet part of town. The streetlights glowed soft and golden. He didn't try to hold my hand, didn't lean in too close. He just walked beside me, like a man who knew that presence meant more than pressure. At my car, we paused. "I had a really nice time," I said, surprised at how much I meant it. "Me too," he said. "And no pressure, but if you ever want to do it again, I'm here." I nodded. "I'd like that." He smiled, and for a second I thought maybe he'd lean in, but he didn't. He just stepped back, gave me space, and said, "Drive safe, Emily." That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Not because I was confused, but because for the first time in years, I felt something entirely new. Not butterflies, not sparks. Peace. Daniel didn't make me feel like I had to be anything more than I already was. And after years of shrinking, performing, sacrificing pieces of myself for the comfort of someone else, that felt like the most romantic thing in the world. The email from Claire came on a Monday morning, just as I was about to walk Chloe to school. "Emily, the publisher loved your edits. They want to offer you a permanent senior editor role. Remote, flexible, benefits. Let me know if you're ready." I stood frozen in the kitchen, phone in hand, heart thumping. I'd been freelancing comfortably for a while, balancing the kids and healing, taking on enough projects to stay sharp, but not so much that I lost myself. But this was more. More responsibility, more income, more recognition, more commitment. I walked Chloe down the block, her hands swinging in mine as she skipped across the sidewalk. "Mommy, why are you smiling like that?" she asked, peering up at me. I hadn't even realized I was. "Because," I said, squeezing her hand, "someone just reminded me I'm good at something." When I got home, I sat at the dining table, still bare except for the plant Daniel had brought over last week, and reread the email. I didn't hesitate this time. "Yes," I replied. "I'm ready."
That night, Daniel came over with Thai takeout and a bottle of red wine. We ate on the couch, legs tangled, a playlist humming softly in the background. The kids were with Michael for the night, and the apartment felt different. Less like a stopgap, more like a home. I accepted the full-time role, I told him between bites. He grinned. I was wondering when they'd figure out they couldn't do better than you. I laughed, touched by his quiet pride. Does it scare you? He asked gently. A little, I admitted, but not because I doubt myself, just it's the first big thing I've said yes to in a long time. You've earned it, he said. Later, as we cleared dishes and refilled glasses, I asked, do you ever miss the version of your life that used to feel certain? Daniel leaned against the counter, thoughtful. Sometimes, but I don't think I ever appreciated certainty until it was gone. Now I think I like not knowing exactly where I'm headed, as long as I'm moving forward. I looked at him, really looked at him. His presence had never felt heavy, never overwhelming. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't ask me to be anything other than myself. He just showed up. That night, when he kissed me, it wasn't fireworks or breathlessness. It was warm, safe, real. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was betraying myself by letting someone in. I was honoring her, the woman who had crawled out of betrayal and silence and found her voice again, the woman who could choose, not out of desperation, but from a place of strength.
It was a quiet Saturday morning when Chloe asked the question. We were painting at the kitchen table. She was working on a lopsided rainbow. I was adding leaves to a watercolor tree. Music played low in the background, and the light coming through the window was soft, golden. She didn't look up when she said it. Do you still love Daddy? The question was so soft, I almost thought I'd imagined it. I paused, brush midair. She kept painting, but her little shoulders were tense. I set the brush down and took a breath. I love him, I said slowly, but not the same way I used to. Did he stop loving you? I swallowed. I think he stopped showing it the right way. And sometimes, when love isn't taken care of, it gets smaller, or it changes. She looked up then. Is that why we live in 2 houses now? Yes, I said, eye stinging. But we both still love you and Alex with our whole hearts. That hasn't changed. It never will. She nodded, her eyes too old for her small face. And Daniel? She asked. Do you love him now? I blinked. Daniel is someone I care about, someone who makes me feel safe and seen. But do you love him like you loved Daddy? I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because the answer mattered more than I expected. I think love doesn't always look the same. With Daddy, it was fast and bright. With Daniel, it's slow and steady. But both kinds are real and important, and they both helps me become a better mom. Chloe was quiet. Then she reached over and touched my hand. Okay, she said. I just didn't want you to be sad anymore. That was the part that broke me, because somewhere along the way, in all my quiet healing and careful choices, I had forgotten that little hearts were watching. Later that evening, I told Daniel about the conversation. He didn't flinch, didn't avoid it. Instead, he said, "That's a good question, from a smart kid, and a brave answer from her mom." He pulled me close, held me like someone who understood that love is not always about romance. It's about choosing to stay in the room when things get complicated. I laid my head on his shoulder, heart full yet raw. There were still cracks in me, still parts that flinched at memories. But maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting the pain, but learning to live a beautiful life beside it. And in that life, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was whole.
It ended the way most beginnings do, quietly. A Tuesday morning, the kids were still asleep. The apartment was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and rain tapping gently against the windows. I sat by the kitchen counter, laptop open, editing a chapter that felt like someone else's story, but also somehow mine. Daniel had left early, kissing my forehead before heading to work. No promises, no pressure, just a soft, "see you tonight," like we'd been doing this for years.
There was no fanfare, no big declarations, just peace. And peace, I'd learned, was everything. I looked around the apartment, the drawings still taped to the fridge, the bookshelf overflowing, the faint trace of laughter that seemed to linger in the corners. This wasn't where I thought my life would end up, but maybe it's where it was always meant to begin. I opened a new document, not for work, for me, and I wrote, "Dear Emily, you did it. You didn't fix everything. You didn't undo the pain, but you stood up. You walked away. You cried and rebuilt and let love back in. Not the kind that sweeps you off your feet, but the kind that lets you stand on your own. You loved your children fiercely. You faced the hard questions. You let go of guilt that was never yours to carry. You became someone your past self would be proud of. And most of all, you came home." I didn't plan to share the letter, not with anyone. It wasn't meant to be read aloud or published. It was a love letter to myself, the kind I never knew I needed. I saved it, closed the laptop, and stood by the window. The rain had stopped. The street was quiet. A single bird landed on the railing of the fire escape, shook off the water, and flew away. And as I watched it disappear into the sky, I whispered to no one in particular, "I'm ready now."